Very good morning to all of you. Can you hear me? Just raise your hands if you can.
Yes, sir. Morning, sir.
Excellent. Okay. So I just like to inform you upfront that all the classes will be recorded. So some of you have objections to it. Feel free to let me know. Because this is the IISc policy that all classes will be recorded and put up for later viewing. It will be especially important for those of you having a poor network connection because I'll be uploading these lectures, all the lectures of this course onto YouTube as well, apart from it being available on Teams, because YouTube gives you the opportunity to view it at any particular resolution that your bandwidth might be most comfortable with, and also for those of you who want to review the class, it will help. So that's the reason why we record. So every class will be recorded. In case I forget, just remind me, or any one of you can just press the record button. I hope many of you are already getting familiar with the Teams platform, because I guess most of the other classes or courses are also running on Teams for you. So just I'd like to check on everything. Right now I think we have how many participants? About 34 in this meeting, including me. So let's see. So I think we should have a strength of about 40 plus 42, I think. So about 6 or 7 are yet to join. Anyway, we'll go ahead and start the class. Before we do that, I just want to do a few things. If it's possible for all of you to just turn on your videos. Keep your microphones muted, but just turn on your videos, all of you. Okay, once you turn on your videos, you see the three triple dots, the triple dots on the top. So which says more actions. So just click on that and come down to the together mode. You able to see that? The together mode. Yes. So this is the best we can probably do since we are suffering from COVID. And having virtual classes. This is probably the best togetherness that we can have as of now. Hopefully it will still be warm, and it will set up the groundwork for when you are actually able to return to campus, and we'll have a great time there. Okay, so this is the together mode. So whenever we are not running through the PowerPoint slides, which I'll be talking you through, we'll probably interact through this so that we can all see each other and have much more camaraderie going forward. So I still see the number of participants, 34, it remains that. Okay, fine. So those of you who have an aerospace background, can you raise your hands? 1, 2, 3, 4. You can raise both your virtual hand as well as the real hand. So you see a hand sign on the top, because we'll use that quite often, especially when I'm using the PowerPoints. So if you can click on that hand sign on the top line. Very good. Okay, apart from raising your hands. So good. So quite a few of you are with an aerospace background. So if you have an aerospace background, I'm sorry to say much of this course may actually be a cakewalk for you. I'm sorry, not to you guys, but to the others, because you have advantage over the others. The reason is that this course, as well as most of the core courses in the MTech curriculum, is actually designed to or intended to expose non-aerospace engineers to the aerospace fields, and in this particular course to the aerospace structures. So because of that, most of the textbooks followed, as well as the course curricula itself, will be pretty much at an undergraduate level. but I will be trying to include occasionally certain glimpses of the research that I do and other colleagues do, not only in IISc but around the world, related to aerospace structures, so that you see what is the state of the art research as well in this field. But the main content of the course, as well as also the exams and the evaluation will all be based on mostly undergraduate stuff. Okay, so now we already saw how many of you. Yes, any of you had questions? Saji, I just see a few hands going up. Udairaj, Saji, any of you have questions? You can unmute and ask me. Okay, I guess it was unintentional. Okay, so anytime, feel free. This is going to be a highly interactive class. So anytime you have any questions, just feel free to unmute your mic and ask me the question, because sometimes I may not see the hand while I'm making the PowerPoint presentation. So while we are talking like this, of course, I'll see the hand signal going up, but otherwise it might be possible that I might miss it. So I would like to request you, feel absolutely free. There's nothing which can be called a silly doubt unless it is answered. So every question is actually important, and then it might benefit not only you but the others in the class as well as me. So in my past classes, I've learned quite a lot from the questions that have been raised by some of the brilliant students that we have had on the IISc portals so far. So we've already seen that a few of you are aerospace engineering background. Let me see how many of you are from the other backgrounds, other BTech backgrounds, that is. Okay, somebody's. Let me admit. Yeah. So let me see how many of you are from the civil engineering background. So can you, just the civil engineering background, raise your hands? Just one of them? Civil, again, raise your hands. Two. Okay. So yes, so that's interesting. So what are your names? The civil engineering, you can unmute and let me know.
Sir, Shubhashish.
Okay, and?
Chetna.
Okay. Anybody else from the civil engineering background? Surprised to see only two. Usually we have quite a few. Maybe amongst the absentees. Okay, so Subhashish or Chetna, if you can just think aloud and say, what do you think are the main differences between civil engineering structures like bridges, buildings on the one hand, and aerospace structures like, let's say, airplanes, helicopters, rockets, spacecraft like satellites, in terms of the materials that they use, in terms of the geometry that they use? What do you think are some of the differences that you observe? You don't need to have gone through aerospace engineering to do that. Just an keen observation is all that is required to see. There are certain very prominent differences between civil engineering structures on the one hand, which have been around for much longer compared to the aerospace engineering. So they have much bigger history. There's a lot that aerospace engineers have learned from civil engineers. I was recently telling some of the new PhD students who have joined us that because one of them or two of them are from civil engineering background, I was mentioning that some of the top aerospace structures researchers have been from the civil engineering background. So not only in IISc amongst the faculty, but around the world, both in the academia as well as the industry. So there's because the physics and the maths is what is the fundamental thing that is required for anything and everything that you do. and that's something that you learn already in high school, and as you go through BTech and now through MTech and some of you PhD, you're just adding terminology and specializing in those aspects of physics and math that you already know quite well. So if you learn the terminology involved with any subject, not only aerospace structures but any other field that is seems absolutely new to you now, you will see that actually once the terminology is learned, half the subject is learned, because using that terminology you're basically describing the same old physics and maths that you know, probably in a more applied manner, because now instead of just knowing the theories, you're starting to apply them to actual practical problems involving flight vehicles, and that's where the key comes in. Okay, so Chetna and or Subhashish, can you just unmute and let me know what you think are the differences between civil and aerospace structures?
Sir,
Yes, please go ahead, Subhashish.
sir, what I have observed that in civil engineering part, we are mostly into beams and columns.
Can you speak a little louder? Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, now I can
Hello?
hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, what I have seen that in civil engineering, we mainly deal with static structures first of all, and mostly we deal with beams and columns and the bending of those things, bending and compression. Whereas in aerospace field, I have seen that we deal a lot with thin wall structures, where the shear is the dominant thing. This is one difference that I have seen. Also in aerospace, I think composite plays a very important part actually. Everything is made up of composites, whereas in civil we deal with homogeneous like steel, timber, and RCC is there, which is a composite, but not the kind of composite that we use in aerospace. So these are some primary differences that I have observed in these two fields.
Excellent. Yeah, so very good salient differences that you have pointed out. We'll come to that after Chetna replies as well.
Yes, sir. Majorly, what I have observed is that we deal with static loading in structures, which are in civil engineering structures. Majorly, the only dynamic loading that we consider for civil engineering structures had been earthquakes. But I believe that in aerospace structures, the majority of the loads that would be considered would be dynamic in nature. And yes, also the very pronounced use of composites, I believe, is a specific feature of aeronautical structures. In civil engineering structures, mostly we deal with steel and concrete, and the methodologies that are used to deal with these composites are very different than what it seems like in aeronautical structures.
Excellent. Yeah, very good, Chetna. So I was really looking forward to these kinds of inputs from you. So I think you are very clear in your mind, both of you, Subhashish and Chetna, in terms of these differences between civil engineering and the aerospace engineering structures. See, if you can broadly classify what you already mentioned, they basically can be divided into three categories. One is the loads, the kind of loads. The other is the type of geometries and the type of materials. Okay, so in all these three categories, you will see differences are occurring between these two structures, but definitely we can learn from all of these things, because as I said, civil engineering has a huge history, and as Subhashish rightly pointed out, RCC is a composite, and that's one of the first engineered composites, though nature has even earlier examples for us. Our very bones and wood, for example, very strong structures which last for quite long, take all kinds of loads, static, dynamic. So these are composites as well. So, but in terms of the methods of analysis, again, a fourth category of differences that you said. But methods can sometimes, if applicable, be transferred from one field of engineering to other. But it's primarily in terms of the choice of materials, because you want much lighter materials for aerospace, because if you have very heavy materials, make the vehicle heavy and make it either impossible or very difficult to fly, and even if it flies, it will consume a lot more fuel, and therefore it will be very inefficient and expensive to fly. So and when we say light, we just don't mean the mass density of the material, because that is one aspect. As we shall proceed in our course, we will see that there are much more intricate engineering ways of comparing two materials. Suppose you have a material A and a material B. The difference between them is basically seen in terms of the specific strength, specific stiffness, and later on we will also see specific stability. Okay, because stability, you already pointed out, Subhashish I think pointed out about buckling as one of the important things that is to be considered in the case of civil engineering structures. But you will see later on that compression is an important loading in the aerospace structures as well, because you very well recall from your basic strength of materials that any bending will result in both tensile and compressive stresses, and that compression can also cause local instabilities, what we call as buckling or wrinkling and things like that. So it's important that you understand that it's not only in terms of the types of materials, but also the types of loads you have a difference, but most salient difference is in terms of the geometry. As you rightly pointed out, thin-walled structures. So you have much more thin-walled structures in the case of aerospace engineering, because once again, coming from the fact that we want a lesser weight for the flight vehicle, and we will see the reason for this and why this helps and still works. So coming back to the choice of the material, I said we have three criteria based on which we select the material. One being the specific strength, which is defined as the ultimate tensile strength of the material in any given direction divided by the mass density. Chetna, you wanted to ask a question? Yes, see your hand raised. You have something, Chetna?
Sorry, sir, it was unintentional.
Okay, fine. So that is specific strength. Sometimes it might be defined as yield strength or whatever is the strength up to which you probably are allowed to go, the allowed stress limits, and it can be a very different thing to define in the case of composites, because it's direction dependent, being an isotropic material, as we shall see later on. But essentially, it is the strength in the direction in which it is strongest divided by the mass density. That is called as the specific strength. So between material A and material B, you will be comparing the specific strength and seeing which has higher specific strength. In other words, for a given unit density, what is the strength it can offer? So that is the way we decide on whether a material is strong enough to be used for an aerospace application. Whereas in the civil engineering application, the weight may not be that important a criteria for most structures. So the density will not play a part, and absolute strength will be compared between two materials, apart from many other factors like the economics, the cost involved, etc., etc. So but primarily from a physics or a structural point of view, specific strength is important. The next important thing is also, because you do not want too much of deformation, so the specific stiffness is also important. In other words, it's the Young's moduli in the desired directions. Because I'm again and again stressing this phrase, in the desired direction, because we will be dealing with composites, and as you know, even in reinforced concrete, the stiffness or strength along the direction of the steel rods is much higher compared to that in the perpendicular directions, what we call as the transverse directions, right? So specific stiffness is defined as the stiffness in any desired direction, usually the stiffest direction, divided by the mass density. So once again, you'll compare materials A and B with this ratio to see which has a higher specific stiffness, and then you will choose that material, assuming its availability, its cost, and other things are conducive to a particular design. The third thing is a little difficult to talk about it now. We'll probably leave it to another class, but it's specific stability. It's a measure of how stable your material is. Though geometry plays a very critical role in stability, there's certain things that we can see from the stiffness of the material and the density itself also to dictate how, with the same geometry, if there are two different materials used, which will be more stable than the other. So that is what the specific stability basically tells you. So this is the main difference that you see. Because you want a lightweighted structure, you try to see that you have higher specific strength, higher specific stiffness, and higher specific stability, depending on the specific location to which this structure goes, because there's so many different structural components in an aircraft. If you look at the major divisions, it's the fuselage, the wings, the horizontal stabilizers, what we call as tails, the vertical stabilizers, also called as tails. Now, each of these have very different kinds of loads coming from the pressure of the air acting on them, the shear of the viscous fluid, which is the air again flowing across them. Then there is the weight of the aircraft, which is again a distributed thing, because at different locations you have different materials of different geometries, so it's a distributed load again coming from the weight. And then there are the engines providing the thrust, which may be, as you would have seen while you're flying, sometimes overhung over the wing, sometimes on the top of the fuselage, close to the tail, the vertical tail. So there, all those locations, you will have a thrust coming from the engine, and that would create loads as well. So now let me go forward and ask how many of you are mechanical engineers. Raise your hands, vertical, your real hand or the virtual hands. Yes, quite a few. Yeah, more than the civil engineers, probably more than the aerospace engineers as well. Okay, any of you from the automobile engineering? Okay. Anyway, as mechanical engineers, I think you'll be exposed to a lot of different kinds of machinery, including automotives as well to some extent. So if you think of automotive structures, let's say a car or a bus or any kind of a vehicle which is moving on the surface, it could even be a railway vehicle like a train or whatever. So something which moves on the surface and of the earth, and something which flies. Okay, so between these two, can any of you mechanical engineers unmute yourselves and tell me what could be the primary differences in terms of requirements? Yes, Nilesh.
Yes, sir. I think in automobiles the major force is due to friction on the ground. But in vehicles that mainly fly in air, the major force may be drag, which the vehicle has to overcome.
Good. Okay, it's a good difference. Anybody else from the mechanical engineering background?
Sir.
Yes.
Myself, Raghavendra.
Okay, Raghavendra.
I think factor of safety is very much different. On ground vehicles, we take more factor of safety when compared to flying vehicles.
Mm-hmm. Very good difference. Excellent. Anybody else? Okay, so that's nice. Those are very important differences what you brought up in terms of the kind of loads, the friction from the surface, which could be a track for a train, or it could be the road for any automobile. Or even, let's say, for a ship moving in water, it could be the resistance that the water provides, whereas most of the resistance that for the aircraft comes from the air. But essentially, it's pretty much the same in terms of the effect that eventually it has. Just that in the case of the surface transport vehicles, it's just the contact surface which is important here. Almost the entire, or rather the entire surface of the vehicle is exposed to the air, and therefore it can all contribute towards drag. Though to what extent it contributes, you will see the differences in your other core courses, especially those of you who are doing MTech. So you will see that. But the factor of safety is a very, very important point that you mentioned. You're right that the factors of safety that are involved in the case of aerospace vehicles are much lower, typically around 1.5, but now it's becoming more and more based on specific reliability of a design rather than just a blind number 1.5. Because as we move forward in terms of understanding materials, both from a theoretical and experimental point of view, in understanding the tolerances that we are capable of with the advanced manufacturing technologies that we have, we don't even need to go up to 1.5. Sometimes it might be slightly lesser than that. It's on a case-by-case basis. But of course, there are also certification requirements like FAA in the US. In India, we have the DGCA for civilian flying vehicles and the CEMILAC for the military flying vehicles. So these have certain rules in place, and all aircraft, before they are actually flown, will have to comply with certain regulations which are there, and factors of safety are some of the things which will be mentioned in certain places. But these again are evolving. The FAA regulations as well as the DGCA CEMILAC regulations all evolve over time as things improve in our understanding of materials, new materials coming up, new kinds of geometries coming up. One kind of new geometry is what is known as the blended wing design, where the wing and the fuselage are both, you don't see a distinction. The fuselage is actually a part of a much larger wing. So that kind of a design. So geometries are evolving for specific requirements, specific applications. Similarly, the materials are evolving, better and better composites. When we say better composites, again, it means higher specific strength, higher specific stiffness, higher specific stability. Also in terms of where it is applicable. See, composites are extensively applied already in many of the primary structures like the wing, the fuselage, the horizontal tail, etc., vertical tail. But in terms of the engines, if you see, the temperatures involved are much higher over there. So apart from the mechanical loading, one needs to have a close look at the thermal loading and things that ensue because of the thermal loading, like creep, etc. And also we need to look at some of these being in corrosive environments, because if it's the fuel has already burnt, there can be gaseous elements in the exhaust, especially for the turbine and also the combustor valves to some extent, and the nozzle of the aircraft engine, where the material needs to be protected from that corrosion as well. So these abilities to withstand those kinds of I hear some noise. If all of you can check if you have muted. Yeah. So you need to basically look at those aspects as well, depending on the specific application. So getting materials for aircraft engine is usually much more stringent compared to what you have for the rest of the aircraft, like the wing, fuselage, etc. Now, some of the composites are also high temperature composites, like if you have metal matrix composite. So usually composites, when we say without qualification, we usually mean polymer matrix composites. That is, in a polymer you have certain fibers or particulate matter which are reinforcing it. But when you go for the engine, instead of a polymer being the matrix, you will usually use, because polymers, thermosets and thermoplastics, again between them there's a wide range of temperatures, but neither of those will be capable of withstanding some of the temperatures that we encounter in an aircraft engine, which you will be studying as part of your mechanics and thermodynamics of propulsion course as well. So again, within the engine, again you'll have a huge difference in the temperature range. The fan, the compressor stage might be lower temperatures relatively compared to so you can probably use a metal matrix composite over there, for example. The combustor and you could even use let's say a ceramic matrix composite, which is ceramics usually have higher withstanding capacity of temperature. Then you go to further down to the turbine, where already the burning has happened in the combustor. So there you will see that the temperatures are even higher. So you might want to go for beyond the ceramic matrix composite sometimes to carbon composites, etc. Okay, so many different possibilities are there. We will very briefly touch upon those things, because as I said, this is predominantly an undergraduate course, but I still don't want to leave out the aerospace engineering students who have done their BTech aerospace out of this loop. And also for the others, it will be helpful to know what are the current trends, especially those of you who are already into a PhD program or planning a PhD program further on. It helps to know not only the basics and fundamentals, but also where these are heading in a generic sense, at least in a qualitative sense, as we go forward. Now, coming back to the differences that two of you actually pointed out between automobiles and flying vehicles. One other very important salient difference is in terms of the simplest model that you can have for a automobile can be just a 3 degree of freedom system. In other words, a rigid 3 degree of freedom system where you have it could be any surface on which the vehicle is moving. So on that surface you can have two surface coordinates. If it's a flat road, let's say, it's just along the x and the y directions. But even if it's a curved surface, let's say a hilly surface or whatever, but basically it's a surface on which it is moving. Whether it's a train or it's a automobile, it's basically moving on a surface. That's why we call it surface transport. Even the ministry associated with it is called the Surface Transport Ministry. So you have two directions which can take care of that particular surface. So most of the motion happens within those two surfaces. Of course, there is a suspension because of which there is a movement or vibration that can happen in the third direction, especially when you're going on a rough surface or a hump or whatever. But nonetheless, most of the motion can be translational motion can be described on this. Now coming to the rotational motion, once again, most of the rotational motion again is in a direction which is perpendicular to the surface that the vehicle is moving on. So the vehicle turns when you use the steering wheel on a car, for example, or a motorbike, and then you basically turn like this. So that degree of rotation is very critical. Of course, in the case of a two-wheeler or other such unstable vehicles, the banking in the case of moving over a curved curve, when you're taking a turn, let us say, the vehicle can tilt in these directions, so that can also be a degree of freedom. But predominantly most of the rotation is in this direction. So one rotation and two translation can take care of most of the description. But in the case of a flying vehicle, there is no supporting structure over there. So what you have to do is, even in the simplest model, you have to have a 6 degree of freedom system. Even if you take the aircraft or spacecraft or helicopter as a rigid body, which is very, very wrong to do, but as a first cut approximation, especially you'll see that in flight and space mechanics kind of a course or flight dynamics kind of a course, you can treat to start with the body as a rigid body, but even there you have to deal with all the 6 degrees of freedom. Okay, so the vehicle moves in the forward direction, the sideways, as it climbs it moves in the upward downward direction as it descends. Again, you have the rotational motions, what we call as the rolling motion, which is basically controlled by the ailerons, that is on the wings. You would have seen while you're taking off or landing, there are certain flap structures at the trailing edges of these wings which are lowered down in order to increase the lift coefficient, because you want a higher lift during those phases, both takeoff as well as landing. Landing, you need higher lift because you want a smooth touchdown. You don't want to come and bang onto the ground or the runway. So that flap and in the outer ends of the wing are usually tilted in a differential manner. That is, in other words, if the right goes down, the left goes up, so that on one side the lift increases, the other side the lift decreases, and therefore you roll. Very similar to how you, when you're riding a motorbike, you just bank in a turn, so something like that. So that is that motion is called as rolling. Then you have another motion. So the ailerons, which are the flaps towards the ends of the wings, are the ones which enable that. Similarly, you have what is known as pitching, which is basically the nose of the fuselage going up or down. That particular motion is enabled very similarly by the horizontal tails. So the tails, it could be an all moving tail, or again in the tail at the end of it, the trailing edge of it, you'll have flaps which will be deflected down. If they are deflected down, it increases the lift at the tail, and so if the tail's lift goes up, then basically there's a moment which is created and the aircraft pitches nose down. So that is the kind of effects that you would see. Then finally you have what is known as the yawing motion, which is basically enabled by the vertical tail. So the vertical tail, when you have the trailing edge, which is basically can be shifted to the left or the right. So if it's shifted to the left, what happens is you get a force in this direction, which creates a moment in this direction. So the aircraft will turn to this particular direction. So that's the direction in which you have tilted the rudder. So that rudder is usually controlled by the pedals of the pilot, what's known as the rudder pedal. Some of you have played probably some games on let's say PlayStations and things like that, or even flight simulators might be familiar with this, or some of these malls also have these flight simulators, very low end versions. Some of the labs have very high end versions of these, almost giving you a realistic feel. So many pilots actually train on these flight simulators. But basically you have all of these 3 rotational motions, that is pitching, rolling and yawing. So all these 3 motions put together and the 3 translations that we talked about, you typically have a 6 degree of freedom system. But luckily 3 of these get decoupled from the other 3. So basically whatever happens in the plane of symmetry of the aircraft, those are coupled with each other. In other words, the forward motion of the aircraft, the vertical motion of the aircraft, both are translations, and then basically the pitching motion, which is again in the plane of symmetry. So these 3 are coupled with each other and get decoupled from the other 3, which are in turn coupled with each other. So still for the most basic aspects, we have a 3 degree of freedom system that we can deal with separately, and another 3 degree of freedom system that we can deal with separately. There can be certain very complicated maneuvers involving certain aspects of the engines, etc., where you might at times see some kind of interference between these, but for most parts you can deal with it as 2 separate 3 degrees of freedom systems. So the loading that comes from each one of these, the loading in those respective directions. For example, if you're talking of the motions in the plane of symmetry, it's basically the thrust of the engine which is important, the drag because of the airflow, and then the lift and the weight. all of these are operating in that plane of symmetry if you're taking it in an equivalent way, because when you're treating it as a rigid body, you usually bring all these forces together at the center of mass, or what we will call as the aerodynamic center. We will refer to that later, either in this course or in the other core courses that you're taking. So basically you're bringing a distributed load, a distributed pressure, distributed shear into and integrated over the surface onto certain specific points. So obviously, depending on the point to which you take it, you will have not only a force but also a moment. You know that when you transfer a force from one point to the other, you will have a change in the moment. If there was no moment also, you could have introduce a moment because of that change in the location, depending upon which direction you take that. So these are certain fundamental aspects of statics and dynamics which will be essential as prerequisites going forwards, but most of these will be at the high school level, so I don't see much of a difficulty depending upon the branch of engineering that you are from. As I said, this is basically to introduce non-aerospace engineers to an aerospace structure, so to speak. So that is one of the fundamental differences between vehicles on the surface and in air. Some of you mentioned about factors of safety, but I should warn you, there are certain surface vehicles which have even more stringent factors of safety than flying vehicles. Can anyone think of an example of that? A surface vehicle which will probably have lesser factor of safety than 1.5. Excellent, very good.
Yeah.
So racing cars, in fact, have been some of the pioneers in some of these materials and geometry distribution definitions, which in fact aerospace has benefited from. Though there have been huge amount of spin-offs from aerospace research and aerospace applications to other fields. The racing cars are a classic example of where aerospace has benefited from other fields as well. There you can have even more stringent, and even the not only in terms of the material choices, but even in the geometries, you will have much more thin-walled structures over there, and the kind of loadings and analysis and the design as well. There are lots of similar features between aerospace vehicles and those. And again, in terms of the maneuvers that they do, though they are still mostly sticking onto the ground, still the other 3 degrees of freedom that are not so very important for general motion of automobiles become very critical even for racing cars. So you might have to treat them as 6 degrees of freedom systems as well. So just not kind of belittling any field over here, but just looking at from the very application point of view, some of these differences crop up, and we all need to learn from each other. Multidisciplinary research and multidisciplinary applications are the way to go forward. As I said, we have learned a lot from reinforced concrete as a composite in our understanding of composites, engineered composites like carbon epoxy or a glass epoxy composite when applied to aerospace engineering subjects as well. So it's very important to do all of that. So now I'll probably, before I get on to a PowerPoint presentation, those of you who have switched off your videos, if you can just switch it on for one final moment, I would like to take a screenshot of our class because this is an extraordinary class of 2020. So let me see if I can take in this together mode, just one screenshot, just as a memory of our first class over here.
Sir, I don't seem to have this mode.
Can you, what operating system or what are you, is it a smartphone or a laptop that you're?
It's I'm using Teams application on Ubuntu, Linux.
Okay. When you click on that triple dot, are you not able to see that together mode?
Triple dot doesn't see this. Doesn't show me anything. It
I see.
shows me only device settings, not together mode.
Ah, I see. Okay. Anyway, let's resolve that sometime later. So this, because I'm taking it on my computer. Hopefully you are on screen. Can you raise your hand to see if I can see your video on the screen here? Yes, so we can see you here, so in the together mode. So you cannot see us in the together mode, but we can see you. So you'll be in the picture as well. So let me capture that. Now, can you just give a high five to those who are next to you? If there are two people next to you, you can use both your hands to give high fives. Try to connect the hands in your picture. Excellent. Okay, so let me take a screenshot of that as well. Very good. Nice. So let me now go on to a few slides. Can you see my desktop now? In the slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, sir. Excellent. Okay. So as you know, the course number for this is E204. It's called the Flight Vehicle Structures, because we are going to be talking about not only the aircraft structures, which most such courses in other universities talk about, but we will be talking about a few other kinds of flight vehicles as well. Helicopters once in a while, which sometimes are called as aircraft in a generalized sense, but also spacecraft, the kind of uniqueness that are there in terms of the material choices there, in terms of the geometries that are there, and more importantly the loads, because once in space the aerodynamic loads are not there. What other kinds of loads are there, and how the gravitational loads can probably change over a period of time, etc. Okay, and can arise from multiple bodies as well, depending upon where the spacecraft is. Again, on the other hand, even more complicated structure is either a missile or a launch vehicle, which uses rocket engines, and these will be traveling partly in air during their some part of their mission, and the remaining part in space. So you'll have to account for all of these in the design process. I think we have quite a few people from ISRO and DRDO also, maybe the armed forces as well, Air Force. So some of these people would probably know more about this than me. These are flight vehicle structures that we will be dealing with, both in terms of their geometry and the material choices. Today's class will predominantly be an introduction. As you know, my name is Dinesh, and I've done my PhD at Georgia Tech, and all of my training has been in aerospace engineering. BTech was in aerospace from IIT Madras. ME was that time the degree that most of you are doing now. MTech was called as ME, Master of Engineering, was from aerospace. So I am an alumnus of the same department, so I can understand a lot of things what you are going through. Though they have evolved, the courses have evolved over a period of time. I have gone through pretty much the same system, and that was also in aerospace, and eventually the Georgia Tech PhD was also in aerospace engineering. So the lab that I head in the Department of Aerospace Engineering is called the Nonlinear Multifunctional Composites Analysis and Design Lab. Following this particular course, I'll also be teaching a course related specifically to composites, in particular their nonlinear mechanics, a more advanced course, more of a PhD level course, but the master students are most welcome to attend that as well, because some of the basics required or prerequisites towards that will be covered herein. In between, there's also a course which sometimes I teach and sometimes one of my colleagues, Dr. Narayan Naik, teaches, which is a more basic course on composites, analysis and design of composites. Though I would give you a good feel for composites in this course itself, because as one of you pointed out, composites, even though you're from a civil engineering background, you already understand that composites are very extensively used in aerospace engineering. So a flight vehicle structures course, even if it is basic undergrad kind of a course, if it doesn't touch upon composites, then it's not of much use going forward to any of you. Irrespective of whether you eventually work in structures or not, it's important for you to get a flavor of what structures is all about, because we can't work in ivory towers. We can't work in isolation. It has to be a joint team effort, whether it's analysis, design, or whatever, whether you're in the industry or academia. Most of the work, the research is these days interdisciplinary. So these hard-cut divisions that we have between in aerospace, the 4 divisions are typically classically propulsion, aerodynamics, we have controls, which also includes navigation and guidance, and then structures. There's a lot of interplay between these. For example, when aerodynamics and structures interplay, we get what is known as aeroelasticity. When controls also plays a part in that, we call it aero-servo-elasticity. Thermal loads are involved, aero-thermo-servo-elasticity, and so on. The propulsion, of course, the propulsive structure, the engine itself is a structure. It needs a lot of understanding from the materials and structural engineers' point of view. Don't think of this, especially if you are planning already to specialize in a particular field, let's say propulsion or aerodynamics or controls. Don't think this is an inessential course. A lot of this will be kind of fundamental aspects which will be very essential in making a lot of decisions for you as a controls engineer or aerodynamicist or as a propulsion specialist. So that's the angle from which this particular course will be taught. Though my research is mostly into what are known as multifunctional composites. Again, because they are multifunctional, I get exposed to a lot of multi-physics, in fact some chemistry, so I could rather call it multi-science as well. But we will not look at much of those non-linearities and multifunctionalities here. It will be a unifunctional composite and unifunctional metals, unifunctional polymers, unifunctional ceramics that we will be dealing with in this particular course. That unifunction is that it has to be load bearing. So in other words, we know certain loads are acting on the structure or will act on a structure eventually to be designed in a flight vehicle. So these are the loads that we know of. We want to ensure that those loads are taken care of. So that is the kind of material we have to provide. That's the kind of geometry distribution we should have those materials in, and probably have multiple components to it and see how they can be joined, or as is the want in most of today's technology, integrally manufactured. So composites, though the actual structure might look at you might look at being made in the case of a wing out of multiple parts, like let's say the skin of the wing and the spars, the stringers, the transverse ribs, etc. All of these are actually kind of combined. In other words, they are integrally manufactured in many situations. So visually they might look different, but they are actually integrally manufactured, and not 2 separate or 3 separate things which are manufactured separately and brought together as using rivets, adhesive joints, etc., as was the want in the past. Still, a lot of structures, joints are very critical, sometimes even bolted joints in certain locations, countersunk and etc. But mostly we are moving towards having as few jointed structures as possible, and blended wing design is something that I already mentioned, which is very, very critical in this area. Some of you would have seen in my videos, I am having a poster of Vaibhav in my background. The reason is this whole month we are doing a very, very important celebration of researchers both from India and abroad who have contributed in the field, in their own fields. But in particular, I'm involved with the aerospace vertical, where aerospace technologies, lots of Indians who are working for NASA, Boeing, Airbus, and top universities universities like MIT, Stanford, Caltech, etc. We are bringing them all together, these NRIs who have achieved a lot in aerospace technologies, along with Indian researchers from IISc, IITs, HAL, and the multinational companies which are operating out of India, ISRO, DRDO, etc. And also the stakeholders like the Air Force, the naval people who are involved with the aircraft operations over there, etc. To have 23 panel discussions which started day before yesterday. So I'm sorry, a couple of them are already over, but at least the remaining 21 starting from this evening you'll be able to attend. So I will share the links. Some of you I've already shared probably through other groups, but to this whole group maybe I'll share in the chat. If I forget, just let me know through a message in our chat so that I can share the links each day for the sessions which are occurring that day. All these sessions, or rather most of them except two, are at 7:30. Today's is at 6:30 in the evening, Indian Standard Time. This is basically to accommodate people from different time zones, because a lot of people are from 4 different time zones of US, Europe, some are even from Australia, Japan, etc. It is inconvenient to some of the others, but I think for us it is somewhat okay. Typically these go on from 7:30. They're supposed to go on from 7:30 to 10:30, but both the previous days it extended to 11:30. So 4-hour sessions. But you will get exposed to the real current state of the art, as well as what are the future directions in many aspects of aerospace, not just structures, but the other 3 fields as well. So you will see, and also in an overall sense on design and things like that. So today's session is about hypersonics. India has had a huge achievement recently in terms of the hypersonic technology demonstration vehicle, which flew just about a week or so back. And so the science behind that, what is the hypersonic science behind that, you'll get an exposure to if you attend today's session at 6:30. And there will all be a lot of structures related sessions as well. One, for example, is this Saturday on high temperature materials that I'll be chairing the session for. So I request all of you, if you have the time, to attend these, because that will give you a exposure to the cutting edge apart from the basics that you're understanding through these courses. So as you know, IISc is a 100-year-old institution, in fact 111 to be more specific. The department is also pretty old. In 1942, HAL was established on a public-private partnership, one of the probably the first PPP entities anywhere around the world. And in 1944, just 2 years after HAL was established, they found that there was a lack of manpower, human resources, and therefore the Department of Aerospace Engineering was established. So we are actually a 78-year-old department, one of the older departments anywhere in the world for aerospace, because as you know, the very first known human flight, or at least what is recorded in Western history, is 1903. So that's about 117 years old. So not much after that, just about 4 decades after that, the aerospace department in IISc was established. So it's been a great supplier of human resources for DRDO, ISRO, HAL, and a lot of the aerospace industries abroad as well. The IISc alumni, especially from our department, are like the who's who, and our department is the topmost ranked department in most of the world rankings compared to any of the other departments in the institute. So going forward, okay. I don't mind to scare you with this particular picture. So the reason why I put this picture to show what it will not be like. So whether it's the final exam or the sessional assessments that you would have, none of these will be like this, because I believe that learning is far more important than testing, though testing aids in improving the learning. So from that aspect, yes, testing will be there, but more importantly, learning is what I would like you to take forward. Are you able to see the slide change? Any one of you can unmute and let me know?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Okay. For these online courses, we have been requested, all the faculty of not only aerospace department at the institute wide, we made a conscious decision that we will not overload the final exam. Usually it used to be 50% or a little more, but weightage. So here we will have a weightage of almost 70% for mostly assignments. Sometimes we might even conduct polls during the class, so come prepared for that. It might be a surprise sometimes, and some assignments that you will submit, and my teaching assistants that I introduced to those of you who attended the previous class, an informal class last Thursday. I introduced Renuka Sahu and Rajesh Nakka, two of my PhD students who've been around for more than 2 years with me. So they will be the teaching assistants for this course. Mostly they'll be dealing with these assignments. So any doubts you have on them, apart from asking me, you can ask them as well. They'll have specific class hours for this, and you can seek an appointment with them and interact with them. So these will be distributed throughout the course. We'll probably not have one today, but for most of the other classes we will have assignments, and typically required to be turned in about a week later. So if it's a Tuesday class, it will be due by the next Tuesday, and if it's a Thursday class, it will be due by the next Thursday. But as I said, there will also be certain quizzes, short questions which will be there in the as part of the class itself, and some of these will go towards the weightage as well. Then the final exam for all the courses will be in the entire week, or rather 2 weeks, 2 consecutive weeks of January, the last 2 weeks, 20th to 29th, 21st being my birthday, by the way. And so that final exam will be carrying about 30% weightage. I'm still deciding on how it will be, but most of my exams, surprisingly, will be open book, open notes. So you'll have these, so understandably the questions will be tougher, more realistic, what you as aerospace engineers, not necessarily as a structure specialist, but as an aerospace engineer, irrespective of whether you go into any of the other fields for your eventual specialization. As an aerospace engineer, certain realistic problems that you probably will encounter, or parts of the realistic problem that you need to solve as from a structural knowledge that you gain through this course. So those are the kinds of things that will be there in the final exam. So right now I have not decided, but it's very much possible that this final exam can be an open book, open notes exam, and it could be just open-ended as well. So in other words, it may not be just a 3-hour exam. You can probably take a day or two also to turn in the answers for this. So it will be kind of an extended assignment in that sense. So be prepared for that. But depending upon the requirements, I will see as we go forward, it could be a regular exam as well. So either one of these possibilities exist for the final exam. As I said, what I have in red is something that I'm not so concerned about. What I have in green fonts, not only in this slide, but probably throughout the course, you will see those that are in green will be something which is important. So this is what I think is the takeaway from this course. Even before you learn something, it's important that we unlearn what we have learned already, which is not so correct. So whether it's from our own self-studies or through well-meaning teachers, well-meaning books, but just because they were kind of outdated, or because the kind of knowledge systems that were existing at their times were probably not exposed to some of the cutting edge that we have today. So it's important as we go forward, we unlearn what we have learned, especially if we realize that it's not so correct. And that includes for what I teach in this course also. Maybe sometime down the line, you would see that what I taught is no longer useful or valid, and therefore we will have to unlearn what I teach as well. So this kind of an open-mindedness is very essential, what is called as the thinking out of the box. In fact, I believe that we don't need to even think out of the box, because there is no box. You need to think out of the box only if you imagine there is a box. So there is no such box. So recognize that flow of information from all directions. In Sanskrit we say ano bhadraha krutavo yantu vishwataha, which means let auspiciousness or knowledge or wisdom flow to me from all directions. So that's very important. And just like a dirty container, even if you pour milk into it, the milk will be spoiled. So you need to first clean the container before you put in the milk or whatever fluid that you consider to be valuable or precious. So in same way, when you want to do certain learning, it's important to do certain unlearning as well. And that comes typically through Shravana, or listening. And listening, not just through your ears, but through your eyes, all through all your 5 sense organs, being completely exposed to not just what is being delivered in the class, but in your lives as you go forward and see things around you, how you imbibe what lessons, especially Mother Nature, has to teach us. And all the time she is teaching us many things to unlearn. In fact, as we already saw, composites are an inspiration from wood and bones, which are from nature. The second important thing that we do is what is known as manana, that is reflection. And this is basically learning the more correct. Again, I'm not saying the correct, because as you say, as I already mentioned, what you learn can eventually become something which is not so correct. So compared to what you already know, can you learn something which is more correct, which is much more closer to reality, so to speak, than what you already know? So that learning the more correct. So after Shravana, you come to Manana. So that is what is another important takeaway from this particular course. I would rather urge that this be the important thing for anything that you learn, either in courses or in life. The final thing is the Niti Dhyasana, or basically applying that knowledge. So there's no point in just unlearning not so correct knowledge and learning the more correct knowledge. You'll have to actually apply it to certain problems. Unfortunately, we no longer have a design course, flight vehicle design course, which I used to love teaching in the past, which brings in all these aspects that you learn through your propulsion courses, through your aerodynamics courses, through your structures courses, and the controls and guidance course, and puts it into a overall vehicle design, sometimes conceptual, sometimes actually making that vehicle as well, in terms of the fabrication that is involved, especially if it's an uninhabited aerial system or a micro aerial vehicle or even a nano aerial vehicle. So these are things which can be actually realized, and that's where you see all these interdisciplinary things coming into place. Also, you would see that in the flight and space mechanics course or the atmospheric flight dynamics course, you would see many of these aspects coming together. So this Niti Dhyasana, or enhancing the ability to apply the assimilated knowledge, is the third most important takeaway, especially from my course, but I would urge you for all courses and the life as a whole. So that's basically what the assessment is going to be. Now, so this is what I mentioned in terms of thinking out of the box, because if you really want to gain true knowledge or wisdom eventually, you need to recognize that there is no such thing as a box. These compartmentalization we have for structures, propulsion, aerodynamics and controls is to enable certain basics, or the terminology, the basic behavior, the equations involved, etc., to be understood. But beyond that, you have to, when you do the applying of this knowledge to actual flight vehicle problems, you need to understand that there's no such box. And if you think that you are in the box, and even if you think out of the box, more often than not, you'll end up with unpleasant surprises. Pleasant surprises are always good. It creates wonder, but many times unpleasant surprises. And historically, we've seen these kinds of things have led to certain disasters as well, fatal accidents in the case of flying vehicles. So we'll see certain examples of that specifically when we come across those specific issues. So it's very important that you see this openness not only in terms of these areas of interest, but also interact within your group, because this is a beautiful group that you have. Even today I'm in touch with almost all of the 20 classmates that I had as part of my MTech, many of them from the different fields, because when we work as a team, and that's how the industry works, as teams, that's when you come out with products and technologies and maybe even startups which are going to be of great value to the aerospace ecosystem, to the nation, the country India, and to the globe as a whole, to the human society as a whole. So I think it's very important that you interact with each other, work in teams, and collaborate, especially if you are from different backgrounds in your BTech, and also if you are thinking of already specializing within aerospace, it's important that you interact with those from the other aerospace fields as well. Now, coming to the textbook for this course, as I mentioned, it's an undergraduate textbook, and it's primarily focused on aircraft, but we will touch upon as we go through other flight vehicles as well. But their textbook will be this. Already in the chat box, in the opening comment, I would have listed a few other textbook books as well, which are not textbooks but reference books, for those of you who are interested in gaining more knowledge and trying to understand things in a more deeper way. None of those will be essential from the point of view of the assignments or exams that I give over here, but referring to them might help you in your better understanding, especially if you are focusing on the structures as your specialization eventually. So this textbook is by a professor from Purdue University in the US, C.T. Sun, whose photograph you see over here. This is the second edition, which came in about 2006. Much hasn't changed since then, so we are continuing with this, even though it's a 14-year-old book. But as I said, I'll be incorporating in my classes certain aspects of the research to give you a flavor of what's happened in the 14 years after this book came out. In terms of the publisher, it's John Wiley and Sons. A e-book is also available. Many of you can probably purchase it on Amazon or any other source that you want to purchase it from. It might be available for download for free also some locations, though it violates the copyrights, so it's not advisable, but some people do that. So there are 8 chapters in this book, if I remember right. The first one talks about the aircraft materials and structures, some of which we discussed before we went on to the PowerPoint slides. Then there's an introduction to elasticity, some of which you might already be familiar with, just the definition of stress, the definition of strain, which all of you, irrespective of your branches of engineering for BTech, would have got exposed to, how the stress and strain are related to each other, and certain other aspects, what are the limits up to which they are valid, and how you transform these stresses and strains in different directions, etc. Then we go to specific application of the loadings. First we'll look at torsion, which is basically twisting. So you might be wondering where in an aircraft this might be important. So you see that if you consider my body as the fuselage and my hands as the wings, then you basically see that the aerodynamic forces which are operating there can create a moment, and therefore the wing as a whole can twist. And the place where this twist is usually taken is what is known as the wing box, which is basically a stiffening structure within the surface of the wing. We will go to some of these structural geometries later on, but torsion is a very, very important thing there. There can be certain drive shafts. In the case of a helicopter, for example, the main rotor is rotating, and that's what drives the energy which comes from the engine, basically drives that. And then you have the tail rotor also rotating. There's a drive shaft between them. So once again, in a shaft, as you know, all mechanical engineers and probably others as well, there is a torsion which is occurring, which is typically resisted by shearing stresses or shearing strains. So that's an important thing. Typically these are one-dimensional structures. When we say something is a one-dimensional structure, we mean that one of its dimensions is very small compared to the other two dimensions. So any beam or column in a civil structure, in a house building, you can see columns and beams. These are structures which are one-dimensional, or can be treated as one-dimensional to start with for a simplistic model. So shafts are like that too. So because their cross-sectional dimension, which typically, if it's a circular shaft, the diameter of the shaft is small compared to the length of the shaft, unless you have a very short and stubby shaft at certain locations for certain applications, in which case you cannot treat it as a one-dimensional body. You have to treat it as a three-dimensional body. And even if it's long enough, many cases you want to get more realistic approximations to the behavior in an actual flight vehicle component, you might have to go to three-dimensional models. So that's torsion. Then bending, it's very easy to see. There's a lift on the wing, because of which it is lifted up. Even when the aircraft is on the ground, static, you see that the weight of the wing, self-weight of the wing, will bring it down. So that is, and it's attached to the fuselage, more like a cantilever, and that you will see is basically a cantilever beam under bending. Again, because of the drag or the thrust, because if the engine is on the wing, let us say, that is also creating bending in the other direction. So there is a bidirectional bending which is going on. In fact, the actual thing is much more complicated, because it's not just a force but it's a distributed pressure load, a distributed shear load because of the airflow over the wing. And the way it is connected to the fuselage also, though for most purposes it can be thought of as a fixed end. That's why the tip of the wing is basically free, and then you have the this as the fixed end. That's why we call it as a cantilever. It's a good approximation to start with, but as we try to understand, let's say, damage mechanics, etc., or an accident investigation, we need to look at more realistic aspects of how it is joined, how the wing is joined to the fuselage. Those connections make a very critical play a critical role as well. Then there's also flexural shear. One of you pointed this out, that shear is a critical thing over here. One is because torsion creates shear. In addition, bending also, if it's a bending caused by a transverse load, let's say the lift distribution, that causes not only bending of the wing, but also on each cross section it causes shear. And that is called as flexural shear. So this is a combination of torsional shear and flexural shear. The way these two are considered is slightly different, but the effects are very similar. Very importantly, you should remember that actually thicker structures are much more susceptible to flexural shear failures, like in the case of a composite, delamination, etc. But flexural shear needs to be considered even for thin-walled structures to get a more realistic approximation. Then in thin-walled sections, we'll look at how the shear flows, because between the walls, because the walls are so thin of the structure, and the top surface and bottom surface are not under shear, but there is a shear in between. So we can think of shear as like a flow, just like a flow in a pipe. So those of you with a fluid dynamics background, there's a flow in a pipe. The way you consider that is very different from any other kind of a flow, let's say in a river. So that internal flows is very similar. So a lot of analogies can be drawn in, and that's how we'll be looking at flexural shear flows over here. Then we'll be looking at certain failure criteria for isotropic materials. That's how the book looks at it in that order. Elastic buckling, which is kind of an instability. Some of you mentioned about this earlier. There's also something called as aeroelastic instability. like flutter or divergence, etc. So we might, depending upon the time we have, especially because this being an online format, we might not go into details of that, but we'll give a very, very basic flavor to all of those. There will be separate courses on aeroelasticity. Probably there is one in parallel this semester, but it will be offered later on as well for those of you who are interested in understanding those aspects. But basically instabilities is what we are talking about, how to deal with them, how to avoid them if possible, or at least delay them. Then analysis of composite laminates. So though Professor Sun from Purdue puts composites in the end, these being the most critical aspect of the materials, I will bring it up right up front here. In fact, he has in the initial chapter also, he covers a little bit of the basics of composites, which he uses in the 8th chapter, but I will cover a lot of the 8th chapter up front, so that when you go through all of these things, you're not dealing only with isotropic materials. That way your capabilities will be limited. As I said, there are 2 separate courses on composites which will give you much more advanced details for a structural engineer. But from a non-structural engineer point of view, what aspects of composites you really require to know. Mind you, you really require to know even if you're a non-structures engineer. So those aspects of that from chapter 8 I will be dealing with in beginning itself, so that my way of going through this book will be slightly different. As you know, we have these Tuesday and Thursday classes 11:30 to 1. The recordings of these lectures will be put up on YouTube, as I already mentioned. And the order in which we will go through this is first to start with the fundamentals of aircraft structures, which is probably what we will do in the next class, and the materials that are involved. We very informally touched upon it in today's classes also, more as a comparison between materials which are used in civil buildings and mechanical automobiles, etc. But we will go through in a little more technical detail the equations involved, etc., the actual examples of those materials, how they compare with each other, even if they are all candidates for the specific application, and therefore those aspects which I talked about, like specific strength, stiffness, and stability, etc. But we'll also then go through the introduction to elasticity. This is the order in which the classes will go, not exactly following what is there in the textbook. The introduction to elasticity will be followed by a composite analysis, mostly taking from the chapter 1 and combining it with chapter 8 from the textbook. Then we will look at the torsion aspects. We'll look at solid sections, which are very simple. Most of you will remember many of these from your previous classes. Then thin, open and closed section beams. It makes a huge difference whether it's open or closed, as many of you might already know. So we'll look at how to analyze them, how different they are in the torsional behavior, where to use which of them. Then same 2 sets of geometry, solid and thin. Again, in the thin case, 2 categories, open and closed sections. In other words, a section is closed, we say, then when there is a loop in the cross section. It's a covered loop, like a thin-walled cylinder, for example. When it's a C section, for example, it's an open section because the loop is not covered, so that there is an opening over there. So there are free edges over there in the cross section itself. So that's your open section. So how these 4 categories, that is combination of solid and thin on one hand, open and closed, how they behave, not in torsion this time, but in bending and shear. Next, we look at certain failure criteria. Though the book mainly talks about failure criteria for isotropic materials, we will give a flavor of what it is like for composites. Again, fracture and fatigue, there's a separate course, but we will give the very basic aspects of that. Because as many of you rightly pointed out, most of the aerospace structures are under dynamic loading. So you cannot ignore some of these aspects. Fatigue is where you have a cyclic loading taking place, and so failure might occur even before a certain level of stress is reached in a static loading case. So that's important. Certain impact mechanics is also very critical in certain applications, and the fracture which results in the material because of that, how that crack might grow, etc. Different types of cracks in composites. We'll cover that. Then as an example of instability problems, we'll take up buckling. Again, depending on time, I may not cover this aspect in great much detail, not even as much as it is in the textbook. Let's see how things pan out as we go through these online classes. Then some basic exposure to the structural dynamics, because most of the class in the torsion, bending and shear will be dealing with as static loads or quasi-static loads, which means a dynamic load which can be approximated as a static load for certain results, for certain analysis, which will still be valid as a first cut approximation. Then we'll go into actual dynamics problems where structural dynamics is involved. Maybe not as a flexible mode, but more in terms of a rigid body mode, and then bring in the flexibility aspects and see how that affects the structural dynamics. Some of you might already be familiar with that. Some very basic understanding of testing, because again there will be a specialized course for those interested in non-destructive testing, etc. Aeroelasticity aspects as well. Then because most of the work that we do, analysis, eventually goes into a finite element kind of a formulation, which is not essential for all of you non-structural engineers. We'll just touch through some of these, because when your structural engineer teammate in the industry, let's say, or as a co-researcher or collaborator, talks about certain aspects of FEM, you should not be left out. So at least you should know the basic terminology involved there. And then we will conclude the course with that. So I think with that, I probably have come to the end of my slides. And probably we are close to the finishing time as well. So let me stop sharing over there. And I'd be happy to take any questions the remaining 4-5 minutes live. So any of you can just unmute yourself and ask me a question, or any comments or suggestions?
Hello, sir.
Yes. Yes, please go ahead. Who's this?
Sir, this is Subhashish.
Yes, Subhashish. Yeah, tell me.
Sir, my question is how the course content is going to be different from basic solid mechanics course.
Yeah. Very good question. See, this course will have certain basic solid mechanics.
The syllabus are fairly similar.
Very good. Yeah. Excellent question. See, the basic solid mechanics is like a fundamental building block for understanding any structures, be it flight vehicle structures or any structures. So you see that you have in your basic undergrad a strength of materials course or a elasticity course. Some of those aspects will be reviewed over here. We will not spend too much time doing that, but we don't want to leave people, especially from, let's say, are there any people from electrical electronics background in the group? Can raise your hands. Usually there are quite a few. Okay, so there are people like that who may not have got much of an exposure to solid mechanics, etc. So those aspects of solid mechanics, which are, yes, Nikhil, you're also from an electronics background?
Yes, sir. I am from electronic.
Okay, good. So Samanvay and others, just hold on. I'll answer the questions one by one. Then you can unmute and ask your own questions, the others. So Subhashish, yes. So a part of this course will be covering the basics of solid mechanics, but the goal of this course is not to do that. It's only to bring people up to speed to understand the application. The application is the most critical thing here in terms of thin-walled structures in particular, because thin-walled structures are the ones which are most predominantly used here. So in the case of an aircraft wing, for example, you have the skin, which is like a thin shell. How do you deal with such a thin shell, which most of you would not have come across earlier? But we will not go into very advanced nonlinear shell theories, etc., which are for more advanced courses. But at least we'll get an understanding of how to deal with these two-dimensional structures. We call them two-dimensional because the thickness is very small compared to the other two dimensions of a plate or a shell. Similarly, beam-like structures, be it the spars in the wing or the stringers, Some of you don't understand these terms, please don't bother. We will look at pictures of those in the next few classes to indicate what these are. But these are one-dimensional structures in the sense that their cross-sectional dimensions are very small compared to the length, and therefore we will see that how to deal with them is very different. Again, in many cases they are also thin-walled structures. So how do you deal with such thin-walled beams? And we will call all one-dimensional structures as beams, whether there is torsion in them or not. So we'll not distinguish between shafts and beams like we do in most other courses. And then we will see the failure mechanisms that are very peculiar to composite materials applied to aerospace engineering problems. So in this sense, most of the course will be like an advanced applied structural mechanics kind of a course rather than a solid mechanics course. But we will keep revisiting solid mechanics concepts because without that, the foundation is not there to build towards this. And I don't want anybody to go lacking just because they not had a fundamental course in that. So only those aspects of the solid mechanics which are essential to understand the flight vehicle structures will be dealt with. From the list of topics, it might appear that many of them, especially the introduction to elasticity materials aspects, might seem like solid mechanics course, but it's not. Anybody else? You're welcome, Subhashish. Next. Samanvai?
Sir, I have a question which is a more like suggestion I want from you.
Yes.
So, I'm very new to the aerospace field, like my background is in mechanicals.
Okay.
So, I was thinking about taking those courses which will give me some flavor of aerospace, like aircrafts.
Uh-huh.
So, we be like this course content which we will be dealing with, this contains whole aerospace, means aircraft functionalities and all, because I want to take one more course that is flight and space mechanics, but at the same time slot I'm having solid mechanics, so I'm little bit confused what to do since I'm very new to this aerospace.
Right. Solid mechanics might be important for you from your research point of view, but flight and space mechanics will be important for you from the point of view of being an aerospace engineer. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So I would because if you have already some exposure in mechanical engineering to solid mechanics, I would rather say you go for the flight and space mechanics first, and maybe in a coming semester in some other department you might have the solid mechanics option or an equivalent course which you could probably take then. Okay. And if it's and sometimes if it's not a core course, sometimes the instructors might be willing to change a course if there is a genuine concern for a clash for more than one student. So you can try talking to the instructors as well and see if something can be done. But if in your case, if both, I don't know if solid mechanics is a core course for some other streams, maybe in mechanical engineering. Which department are you taking solid mechanics
Mechanical.
in? Okay.
Mechanical engineering.
Yeah. So if it is
a
so then maybe changing the time will be difficult because they would have already arrived at the most optimal configuration. So you can probably take that in a future semester, or and also you know that these recordings are available now. So
yes.
You can always watch a recording wherever there's a clash. You can watch the other courses recording some other time. But of course, always crediting creates a much bigger difference compared to auditing like that. So I would again also you might want to wait and see until you decide on who you're going to work with for your PhD and what specific research you will do. Based on that also you might want to decide which might be more appropriate for you.
Okay.
Yeah?
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Next. Somebody else had a question. I think 3 or 4 hands went up. Please go ahead. Anybody can unmute and ask. Yes, Subhashish again.
Sorry, sir. It was
Okay. Anybody else? Any questions? Yeah, Subhashish also gave the input. That's a good input. 2 solid mechanics courses are going on, I believe, right now in this semester. One in mechanical and other is in civil. So Samanvay, maybe you can check out the other one if there is no clash. Maybe you want to take a look at that.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So anybody else? Any other questions, comments, suggestions? I saw about 3 or 4 hands go up earlier. Please feel free. Though we are. Yes, Gursharanjit.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Gursharan.
Yes, Gursha.
Sir, I am from DRDO. I am employed in gas turbine research establishment.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
So, I'm not going to major in aerospace field, sir, but I was interested in maybe aerospace structures for especially applied to gas turbines. So I just wanted to know, sir, if I see the syllabus,
Yeah.
don't we'll be able to cover anything. Gas turbines.
Yeah. No, it is not at all covered in the textbook or in the syllabus. But luckily for you, I work a lot with GTRE. In fact, I completed a couple of big projects with them. And so I have a lot of experience working in aircraft engine structures and materials. So I'll be touching upon those aspects as and when it is non-intrusive to the subject. So you will get exposure to those aspects. But recognize that many of the things, even if you do not want to specialize as an aerospace engineer or a structures engineer, many of these concepts are basic concepts which will be essential even in your work in GTRE going forward, irrespective of what you're doing currently, because that overall understanding of the behavior of materials, the behavior of the geometries is very common. The main difference will come in terms of the high temperature applications that the materials and structures in an aircraft engine or any other engine for that matter, be it a rocket engine or whatever, can be subjected to. And the corrosive environments, etc. So we may not touch upon too much of details of those high temperature and the thermal loads ensuing because of that, or the corrosion resistance, etc. But nonetheless, I will try to give appropriate glimpses every now and then.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Welcome, Krishna. Anybody else? Okay, if there are no further questions, and we already exceeded by 7 minutes the class, so we'll hang up and we'll meet in the next class. So thanks for all of your time. I just wanted to get some feedback in terms of those who are still around. Does it seem to be too long a class, or is it okay?
It is okay, sir.
Okay.
No worries. We are in our home only.
Good. That's nice. And because anyway you have the recording, so if there's a disconnection or something, also you can always come back to that recording, which will be a full class. So hopefully it's not too much of.
In between, is it possible to have a 2 minutes break?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the suggestion. In fact, I was thinking of it, but I just went with the flow. I get excited when I'm talking about this subject, so I just went with the flow. You can also remind me probably 1.5 hours down the line. One of you can raise the hand and probably remind me.
After 40 to 45 minutes, if we can have just
Sure.
break.
Yeah, it's a 90-minute class, so I think 40 to 45 minutes we can have a break. So in case I forget, please one of you remind me. You can even unmute. As I said, I would like all these classes to be completely interactive, so I don't mind anybody who would like to convey something to just unmute even without raising their hands. It's fine, okay? Just that if you're not conveying something, then just keep your mics muted so that there's no noise or disturbance for the others, especially echo coming from my own sound back through your audio system. So that's the reason why I request you to keep your mics muted. But otherwise, whether it's something related to the topic or something like a break or something which is essential for everybody, I think please feel free to interrupt and ask me for it. Yeah? Anything else? Anybody?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Pleasure having you all. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Take care. You're most welcome.
Thank you, sir.
You're most welcome. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
See. And those of you who are still there, don't forget to attend the Vaibhav sessions in the evening. So that will be very useful for you. I'll post the links for that.
Right, sir.
Sure. Bye-bye.
मृत्युंजय मंत्राः
त्र्यंबकं यजामहे सुगंधिं पुष्टिवर्धनम् उर्वारुकमिव बन्धनान् मृत्योर्मुक्षीयमामृतात् एते सहस्रमयुतं पाशा मृत्योर्मर्त्याय हन्तवे तान् यज्ञस्य मायया सर्वान् वयजामहे मृत्यवे स्वाहा